Hey everybody, this week I'm going to be taking a look at a Machamp deck from the 2004 format. Now this is a deck that I'm actually really proud of, and it's vastly different than Machamp decks you saw at the time. So starting off here, we play 4 Dunsparce. Dunsparce is going to be essential in making sure that our deck sets up here. We play 4 copies of Machamp. I went with the Karate Chop one because this is the one that's most likely, if we're going to start with it, we want to be able to turn 2 KO the Dunsparce. And not only does hitting for a solid 10 on turn 1 help, but having that turn 2 30 is great against not only Dunsparce, but I guess just anything in general. I split the Machoke line here. I went with 1 Machoke from Hidden Legends. I actually feel this is the better Machoke, 2 energy for 30, and if they hit it, they take 10 back. 80 HP, 1 retreat is also very solid. I also played 1 copy of the E-Reader Machoke, also 80 HP. I believe it has 2 retreat. That's getting covered up here. But the reason that I played it is it will give you an option for a turn 2 Mega Kick if you have a double rainbow for 40. Probably not going to come up a whole lot, but as little as I felt this decision actually mattered, I did prefer to have the preference over just playing 2 of the Hidden Legends Machoke. 4 copies of Machamp from Hidden Legends. Now, Machamp has the Pokebody Overzealous, where if your opponent has any EX Pokemon in play, all of Machamp's attacks do an extra 30 damage. So you take some okay damage numbers and you make them absolutely kind of busted if your opponent has any sort of Pokemon EX in play. Brick Smash does a solid 40 damage and it gets past everything. The one thing I do want to note is it's printed where it'll say this attack is not affected by weakness, resistance, Pokepowers, Pokebodies, or any other effects on the defending Pokemon. So once again, it'll get through everything. But they did put an errata out before Worlds on this card where it will double weakness. So that does come up, and that's actually a major, major thing in the deck itself. So and then we play 2 Skitty, 2 Delcatty, and then 2 Magnemite, 2 Magneton. This is going to be the draw engine of the deck. I do want to note, and you'll see this in some of my decks where I'll play 1-1 Magneton, 2-2 Magneton. I prefer to play a 2-2. I think you see a very noticeable drop in consistency when you drop down to a 1-1 line of Magneton. I will do it in some decks and some lists just for space, but I will say you noticed a pretty big drop in consistency. Now, I also think in the under-evolved forms here in Skitty and Magnemite, I think there's a lot of thinking that can probably go into it, and if you saw a far more developed 2004 format where, if you knew there was going to be a lot of X-Paw decks, for example, or a lot of spread decks, this might affect some of these decisions. I went with the under-evolved forms that have the best attacks, but I can also see a really, really solid argument for playing the 50 HP ones. Like I said, if you were fearing a lot of Snipe and ATM Rock type of decks, the 50 HP basics, while having subpar attacks, might actually be better. But being able to search out 2 basic energy with Skitty not only sets up a nice Delcatty play, but the 10 and auto sleep is also very strong. And then the Magnemite, being able to do that auto Thunder Wave, just that chance at turn 1 paralysis against like an opposing Dunsparce or something, can really put your opponent behind a turn and is also very strong. Now, I play a 101 Victory Bell line, and I'm going to say I think this is probably the best kept secret in the entire 2004 format. And it just goes to show how underdeveloped this format is, because if this format had been more developed, you would see Victory Bell all over the place. And you're going to see it a lot more in some of my 2004 lists. But essentially, Victory Bell is a Pokemon reversal on a flip that you can use every single turn. So while Machamp hits for okay damage, the thing that gives this deck the strength is the fact that you can snipe things on your opponent's bench with relative ease thanks to Victory Bell. And you're going to be going over, and since Machamp is a fighting Pokemon, you're going to really be preying on these support Pokemon that are fighting weak. Not only are you going to be getting some very cheap and easy prizes off of them, but you're also going to just be demolishing your opponent's consistency and their deck. And even if you're not going for a consistency Pokemon like Delcatty or Magneton, you are going to be able to get maybe some early hits in on a big threat that your opponent has. Now, yes, it is on a coin flip, but you get to do it every single turn. So worst case scenario, you are still just smacking the active. Now into our trainer lineup here, 4 Steven's Advice, pretty standard. Now this is where the deck starts to get a little interesting, and you see the strategy come out a little bit more. I opted to play 4 copies of Desert Shaman in this deck. And the reason that I am doing this is because we are playing that Victory Bell engine, where we are trying to get that Delcatty knocked out. We're trying to get that Magneton knocked out. So in a normal game of 2004, it's very hard to quote-unquote lock your opponent, because if you Desert Shaman them down to, let's say, a 4-card hand, all they need to see is a Steven's Advice, or if they have Delcatty Magneton in play, they can just energy draw back up to a decent-sized hand. Now, if we're going to be taking that Delcatty out, taking that Magneton out, it's far more likely, especially in the later stages of the game, that we're going to be able to, really get a good Desert Shaman off and maybe really put them in a bad spot or buy ourselves a turn that we might not have otherwise had. And that's why I went with a Desert Shaman over Copycat in this build. And I think you can play Copycat, but I think Desert Shaman is just a little bit better, especially with a deck like Machamp Machamp's strength is going to be taking advantage of either your opponent playing Pokemon EX or going after those support Pokemon. And Desert Shaman just fits that theme really well. Next up, 4 copies of Rare Candy. Plays well with the 424 Machamp line and the 101 Victory Bell line. We want to make sure we're seeing those candies. 3 Oracle, and then 3 Friend Ball. And you can see in this list that I opted not to play the Professor Elm's training method. And the reason for that is it really is another nod to the fact that we are really trying to take advantage of these Delcatty Magneton decks, where that Friend Ball is going to help us. The bumped up Magneton line, the Desert Shaman, the bumped up Friend Ball, that is all going to help us get our Delcatty and Magneton into play every single game and consistently. 2 copies of Warp Point. This is also another way to take cheap prizes on the bench, get us out of special conditions, get him a champ into the active spot. There's just so much synergy with it in so many different situations. I was only playing 1 copy, but I actually opted to play the 2nd copy of Warp Point over the single copy of Desert Ruins I did have in the deck. 1 Town Volunteers. This way we can force our opponent to go through a full 6 Machamps if we absolutely have to for the game. 1 copy of Ancient Tomb. Now this is my tech for Gardevoir. And most of the Gardevoir decks, or most of the better Gardevoir decks, do not play stadiums. It's just typically not worth it. Most just run a 101 Blossom line to counter the Desert Ruins, and they just leave it at that. You will occasionally see Magnetic Storm to try to improve a Shiftry matchup, but considering the fact that Shiftry is not a very heavily played deck, and the fact that the Magnetic Storm probably doesn't even affect the matchup. I won't even say probably. It doesn't affect the matchup enough to give you that much more. It doesn't increase your win percentage in that matchup by such a dramatic amount. It's worth playing the Magnetic Storm. So basically, if we can stick an Ancient Tomb down in that matchup, and that's able to stay there, Machamp just doesn't have any psychic weakness, and our opponent's going to have to be able to consistently hit those 120 damage to knock us out, which means they have to go Gardevoir EX, which means they have an EX in place. So Ancient Tomb is just going to be a really, really solid play for the deck. Obviously, in some decks, for example, if you're playing against an X-Cloud deck, for example, you're not going to want to put that Ancient Tomb down. So just a little bit of thought process on that there. I play 10 Fighting Energy. I do like the 10 basic energy in this deck. Not only does that help us see that turn 1 energy drop, it also, once again, plays very well with the Delcatty, Magneton, Shaman, Friend Ball engine that we've talked about. And then 4 copies of Double Rainbow. It's pretty easy to get 2 energy under a Machamp. It's very unrealistic that you're going to, I won't say unrealistic, it's not nearly as common that you're going to be attaching 4 basic energy to a Machamp to crosscut, but anytime you have 2 energy under a Machamp, you're going Brick Smash for 40 or 30 with a Double Rainbow. You're always threatening that cross chop with just a Double Rainbow energy. And the nice thing about that is you hit for 50. If they have an EX in play, you hit for 80. And then if you get heads on the cross chop, then you're hitting for 110. And those numbers match up really well against, well, honestly, a lot of decks in the format. It's very good against, it'll knock out a Ruby Sapphire Blaziken, knock out a Watercall Swampert, it knocks out a Gardevoir, and 110 damage is nothing to scoff at when you're hitting an EX. So Double Rainbow is just, playing 4 is just a very easy, essential part of the deck. Also, to kind of quickly note here too, Victory Bell has an attack where it does 40 damage, and you flip a coin if heads, the defending Pokemon is now burned. That's not great, but it is a grass attacker in the deck. If you do need it to, let's say, hit against a Team Magma deck or something like that, it's an okay attack. And Double Rainbow also lets you cover that attack as well. So, and I guess going along with that, Double Rainbow also works with magnetic fields for Magneton. And the point of that is it's very good against, say, Gorbis, where if you're going magnetic field or magnetic force against Gorbis, you are going to hit for you're going to do double damage against them, and you can in later stages of the game actually trade with Gorbis or other Pokemon. And being able to do that means that playing a 2-2 Magneton line means you can pretty easily send one up if you have to and sacrifice it. But this is my Machamp deck for the 2004 format.